Hello guys, how are you all? Welcome back to my channel. So, today we are gonna see, what if Deku got harem with Ochako, Toru and Mina, part 1. So before we start, go check out the author of this fanfic, nobodi in particular, link is in the description, also subscribe to our channel, and like this video, so let's begin the video. Blood. There was just so much of it. So much of it everywhere. It was leaking out of his body like water from a tap, slowly dripping with a repetitive and monotonous irritation that just rang all throughout Izuku's head at a constant pace, which only made it even more painful. Alongside this, he could feel the fractures and breaks in his bones, how his fingers were cracked and damaged almost beyond repair, as proof of his exertion and his strife, how his lungs were steadily breathing in and out next to his unstable heart. As the blur around his vision began to wash over to the point where he could vaguely make out shapes and colors, Izuku knew what was going on. He was in UA, at the tournament. And he was fighting Todoroki. It was at this point the burning hot flares that had previously been etched quietly into his skin began to claw back at him, becoming another reminder of his fight. In a moment of weakness towards his opponent, in a moment of kindness and compassion for Izuku, he had yelled out with all his might as his bones had rattled around inside him that the half-cold half-hot quirk owner's abilities were his own and weren't his father's. The boy had then proceeded to decimate Izuku's body with his long dormant fire powers. Not the smartest of moves. Chuckling slightly before recoiling at how it jostled around the bones in his chest, the green-haired boy decided to remain in his slumped position near the edge of the arena to regain any semblance of feeling in his body. If Todoroki was strong before, this new firepower was going to set him up leaps and bounds above the rest of Class 1 and maybe even the entire year. And then, like a flood, he remembered that this was being broadcast, that everyone in Tokyo was watching, that his friends were watching, that his mother was watching. He remembered his promise to himself and to everyone that he would get through this to show them what he was truly like and how powerful he could be, that his dream wasn't a distant figment that could never be achieved. And then he remembered that he had thrown that shot out of the window when he spoke up and told Todoroki to use his powers. Sure, he was happy for his classmate, immensely so, hell, he could write so much more in his notes about this discovery. However, he couldn't help but feel a nagging want in his soul, in his heart about not being able to show off to his fullest potential. Oh well, always next time. Then it hit him. Those eyes, he felt them staring into his soul, compelling him to move just that little bit more. That cloud of figures that existed in a plane not of this world with 8 pairs of eyes that glowed with such intensity and passion that Izuku could feel the drive flow back into him. Those eyes are the eyes of one for all. Gritting his teeth, Izuku made up his mind. He had given his all, his 100%, but to be a hero like All Might you needed to go beyond that, to reach the level of power and attainment that the previous one for all owners had. You needed to go beyond your everything. Before his eyes, flashes of the UCG villain incident arose, and he remembered how hard All Might had fought for them, how he was constantly going above his power to beat Nomu. And now he needed to be more than All Might. Hurling his hand into a fist around the broken earth, he felt his bones mash and grind against each other unevenly, but he didn't care at this point. In an almost trance-like state, Izuku rose to his feet in a shuddered and shaking mess of human flesh. Soon, sound returned to his ears, yet all he could hear were the hushed whispers of the crowd and the sudden stopping of trainers dragging across the dirt. Lifting a shattered visage of his one-healed hand to his face, he gritted his teeth once more as attempted to rub the blur out of his eyes, only to cover his palm in a thin layer of blood that was welling up from his mouth. Smirking, Izuku's eyes decided to clear. Before him stood the clearly shocked form of Todoroki Shadow, the son of Endeavor, stuck in a phase of stillness that spread over the whole stadium. Twisting his head, the green-haired boy caught the eyes of several teachers and students who all looked upon him with inquisitive and impossibly large eyes of worry. Foregoing their attention for his opponents, Izuku cracked the bones in his hands in a painfully loud way that set every nerve in his body on fire, but to him all it did was fuel a newly built fire in his core. Round 2 Todoroki. In the stands, the rest of Class 1 could only look on in shock and disturbed glee as they witnessed the revitalization of Midoriya. None of them could have predicted this, that Izuku would be so willing and full of strength that he would be able to stand up and continue fighting after being so mercilessly beaten down by Todoroki's new powers and even his own quirk's drawbacks. It was extraordinary what they were witnessing. Whoa, who knew Midoriya had it in him? Kirishima spoke up in a shaky voice, the red-haired boy glued to the scene before him just like the rest of the class. Yay, and all this is coming after he had already smashed his bones to nothingness beforehand. Damn. Jiru couldn't help but agree, the punk girl twirling her earphone jacks around her fingers to seize her ever-growing tension. Some members like Hagakure and Mina were gripping the rail in front of them so tight that I could snap at any minute. Worry and concern etched into the pink-skinned girl's face, while the shuffling of feet and constant creasing of clothing told of the invisible girl's feelings about the situation. Others like Mineta and Kaminari were looking on with glazed-over expressions with a mix of jealousy thrown into their concern for good measure, while some were unreadable like Shaoji and Takuyomi, who were looking at each other with an unknown expression regarding their classmate, and people like Iida and Momo were talking quietly about the possibilities of how this happened after Izuku had already taken this much damage. Some were like Uraraka, with the girl having folded in on herself with sheltered concern that leaked out into the world with her eyes still fully engrossed into the battle. And further still, others were like Bakugo who, while appearing uninterested and unconcerned, had their eyes locked onto the scene through the corners of their gaze. As to say, everyone was waiting on bated breath to see the outcome of this new factor. But the teacher, they all watched in morbid curiosity as the crowd shuddered and cringed at the harsh cracking sound of Izuku's fist, the bones clashing against each other in a hard snap. Glancing at each other, they all began to quietly murmur about these new factors. Supposedly, the match should have finished a few seconds ago, but Izuku had gotten back up in time to still be in the game. And from this stand, All Might sat with a fierce veil of concern on his face as he looked upon young Midoriya. In his mind, Yagi couldn't help but feel responsible for this. It was his quirk that was making Izuku do this in the first place, make him hurt himself every time he tried to save someone or do any kind of heroic act, but also in his mind, he was confused and intrigued by Izuku's new actions. Sure, in his time being a hero, he had had some exhilarating fights that had forced him to stand after being brutally beaten down, but this was something else entirely. While he was lost in thought, the quiet pitter-patter of footsteps drew the attention of no one as the principal made his way over to the skinny man's frozen form. Setting his tiny body down next to the man, the principal spoke in a hushed tone. "Do you know anything about this, Yagi?" Drawing the number one hero out of his stupor, the man quickly responded. "If I'm to be honest, no idea. Nothing to this extent has ever happened to me before." Raising his eyebrows at the taller man, the mouse gave a small sniff. "What about the fight with Chainsaw? Or the Hateful Eight? They both took you down to your last legs a few times, just like with young Midoriya now, so, what do you mean?" Glancing down at the field, both men just sat there for a minute as they looked upon the smirking, battered form of Midoriya Izuku. All around his body, a thin veil of red and blue lightning crackled and sparked the air as his skin began to make marks and indentations very lightly on the flesh. And then there were his eyes. His pupils appeared small and almost empty amongst the much larger white layer of his sclera, but they were there and they were conducting sparks and strokes of lightning like a generator until his eyes were lost in feeds of blue and red. When I was fighting them, I was fighting to save people and to help people. At the minute, Midoriya is finally being selfish, he is deciding to fight for himself and show his power. An almost villainous act in the eyes of some, but there is something else that is there within him, something I just can't quite place, but trust me, it's there." Taking in a deep breath, Yagi turned to his successor once more. "And it will make him even stronger than I." In a dark, drab room in the middle of the city, a lone man sat in a room illuminated only by computer monitors and screens with his body hidden under layers of black and a hood. Idly, he was messing around with his fingers as he stared upon the forms of two boys on his screen, of a battle. Of the fight between Izuku Midoriya and Shadow Todoroki. And, as he watched, he felt his face break out into an almost impossible grin. This was that boy from before, with the green hair that had threatened to stop his plans at the training center before All Might showed up. This kid, Midoriya. Looks like you got some skill, kid. Show me more." A few blocks away, the sound of a low TV rumbled through decrepit and blood-soaked walls as two figures stood before it, bathed in its bright light. One was a girl dressed in the outfit of a schoolgirl with her blonde hair tied in a strange and uneven way that left two strands dangling on either side of her face, of which held a pair of yellow eyes and sharp canine teeth with a bright red blush adorning her cheeks. The outfit was also stained in a fresh layer of blood. At the minute, she was sitting on the cut-up body of a man who no longer even looked human as she stared at the two people on TV with a lovesick expression on her face, directing her attention at one in particular. Behind her stood the form of a tall slender man with mismatched pale skin with wrinkled purple flesh that looked sewn together alongside a messy head of black hair and black eyes. For his outfit, it consisted of an open black shirt with a white undershirt alongside black pants and trainers. He was currently staring at his partner with a confused expression. Toga, why are we watching this?" Almost immediately the girl answered. "The green-haired one is really cute and I think he's going to get more bloody. We need to watch this, Dobby, we just need to. I need to see this cutie all bloody." Her words were dark and malicious yet in a sing-songy way that made her sound like a child. Instead of arguing with her, Dobby just sighed and focused his attention on the screen, intending on watching the action unfold. Hopefully this'll be worth something. Taking a step forward, Izuku just let his grin spread as he felt the bones painfully shift in his foot. Before him, Todoroki just sighed before turning to fully face him. "Midoriya, you're hurt, you can't possibly continue." "Do this," Izuku laughed. Then with a narrowed gaze, he channeled one for all into his legs and leapt at the half-hot, half-cold quirk user with extreme speed and power, followed by the loud crunch of bone as Izuku shot forward in the air. Rearing his fist back, he just roared in pain as he swung his power-imbued limb at the boy before him. Using his first instinct, Todoroki ducked just before he was hit, but that didn't stop Izuku from smashing his fist right into the ice wall to the right of him. In a brutal display of power and pain, Izuku roared out as his fist broke the entire wall in a single blow, sending out shockwaves of power that spread the shards all over the arena. Taking this moment, Todoroki shot backward and away from the green-haired boy as he stood up on his broken legs to examine his fist. It was clearly broken and badly damaged, with the skin being burnt and scratches around his fingers and knuckles, and around that very area blood was beginning to seep out through cracks in the skin, dripping onto the floor like a crimson waterfall. However, Izuku seemed to ignore it, instead opting to pull the digits back into place with his other hand, resulting in a harsh click to echo throughout the stadium. Shaking his head, Izuku's eyes were then back on Todoroki, and not a second passed before he leapt at him again, his legs cracking again as he launched forward. This time, Todoroki had no time to move, instead choosing to summon a wall of ice to at least slow the power-infused boy before him down. It didn't. Izuku just smashed through the icy pain like it was nothing, not stopping his assault on Todoroki, instead contacting the boy's stomach. With a powerful sweep, Izuku pushed all his power into his fist and skyrocketed Todoroki off into the distance, causing him to cut through the air with unmatched speeds before colliding with another one of his ice sculptures. Growling at the pain, Izuku just smashed his fist into his chest with a hearty grunt before lifting both of his arms into the air before quickly sweeping them down into an arc. With the speed generated, a massive gust of air like when he flicked his fingers was produced, but it was much wilder and crazed as it cut across the skies towards the downed Todoroki. Said boy was just fast enough to catch it, taking off into the air before it caught him. However, the edge got to his foot as he was leaving, sending him into a spiral as the earth fell apart around him. Once again, Izuku was there, his eyes practically gone with the pain, as another bout of loud cracking filled the air as he lit his arms mid-jump and smashed them down into Todoroki's stomach, sending the boy careening quickly down into the smashed earth, breaking it even more. Just as fast, the green-haired boy was down at the floor as well, sliding under the bounced form of Todoroki before using his hands like a spring underneath his back to propel it, twisting it straight at the boy's spine. Howling in pain as he was once again sent into the air, Todoroki tried to combat the ever-aggressive Izuku. Throwing his hand to the floor, rows and rows of sharp icicles started to emerge from the floor as he flew, blocking off any path of entrance to his quickly escaping form. Spitting out blood as he watched a dual-colored boy fly off, Izuku quickly jumped back at him, smashing through the icicles with reckless abandon, not even caring when they cut and bit into his flesh. Finally catching up with the other boy, his body trying to stand from being kicked around like a ragdoll, he leapt at him again, foot first. Rearing it back, he swung at him, only narrowly missing his head as he ducked, but just like with his arms, a blade of air was generated, slicing into the ground behind him. Taking this as his moment to strike back, Todoroki grabbed Izuku's head before lighting his knee on fire and slamming his face into it with a roar, sending him bouncing up slightly before letting the opposite leg, which was infused with ice, collide with his side, which sent the boy spiraling a few meters away. Izuku wasn't down for long though. Flipping up backwards with his hands, another snap being generated, Izuku leapt back with his feet raised once more. He began to widely swing and swipe them to generate more and more blades to cut towards his foe. Gritting his teeth, Todoroki tried to avoid them, but a few nicked his exposed flesh and cut up the ground at his feet, making it hard to stand. Using this opportunity, Izuku ran forward and used Todoroki's head as a springboard before slamming his body back down to earth like a comet. When he impacted, the world was thrown into disarray once more as pieces of land flew up into the sky, and so did Todoroki. Growling, the boy noticed that Izuku was resetting his bones again, groaning as he did so, and so he used this as a chance to end this fight. Performing a roll, he quickly navigated the floating pieces until he got to Izuku before he slammed a fist of fire straight into his chest, causing a massive explosion of heat and flames to disperse all over the stadium. Enough. With that shout, he watched as a silhouette of Izuku went flying off into the fiery inferno that had engulfed the whole other half of the stadium. Stumbling back, he took in many deep breaths and he began to feel the effects of Izuku's attacks, a few broken ribs and bruised muscles. Thank God, his ice blocked most of the damage. Bending over, he just let the sounds of the stadium take over. However, he heard a noise from the fire. Almost immediately, all eyes were on the fire, and with a bated breath they watched as a figure began to emerge from the heat. Out of the flames, walked out an Izuku with gritted teeth and a broken body with blood and sweat dripping down his form. The top part of his outfit had been torn and shredded so much like the right side of Todoroki's outfit, he ripped it all off and threw it to the fire. Due to this, his rather built and lean form was exposed to the world, and despite the situation many girls found themselves blushing at the display of hard muscle on display on this once scrawny boy. Strange and intriguing would be the word that they would describe it as. Not even taking note of their stares, Izuku just focused all attention on Todoroki before he started off into a gentle jog. Todoroki copied. This then morphed into a sprint from one side to the other. Todoroki copied it again. This then finally climaxed into an all-out run to the center of the field for both contestants, with battle cries emerging from both of their throats before they leapt into the air and towards each other. However, Izuku didn't have his first drawn, instead, a massive amount of crackling and build-up was emerging around his skull. Suddenly, everyone realized what he was doing. He was going to infuse his skull with his quirk and ram it into Todoroki. Roaring, Izuku took off from the ground with lightning speed that Todoroki had no time to combat. Instead, he had to suffer as Izuku collided with him at a slightly lower angle, hitting his chest with his head and causing him to go flying back with shockwaves following his movements as he flew and fluid fell out of his mouth. At the same time, Izuku began to feel the kickback and he too flew back in the opposite direction, hitting the ground sooner and then repeating an action of colliding with the earth before coming to a stop as Todoroki hit the earth as well. The stadium went quiet as they waited for either of them to move. They didn't. Izuku woke up coughing and spluttering. He could feel and taste the blood in his mouth, the copious amounts of spit and saliva that had accumulated over however long he had been unconscious as he heaved in and out air in a harsh and heavy attempt to recover any sense of feeling into his lungs, which also pained and shook as he coughed. And all this was bearing the shattered and sloshy movement that he felt in his head. It was like his skull was some sort of river, carrying some sort of heavy fragment of earth downstream. In all aspects of his body, he just felt like complete shit. After his coughing fit, he noticed his surroundings and his situation. The ringing in his ears was a clear and easy thing to notice for the teen, the piercing sound easily affecting his battered and bruised body. Then there was the constantly and clicking sounds his body made at any sort of small movement, whether they be shifting in his arms or legs or his chest. This was only exemplified when he attempted to lift his hands to his mouth to wipe away the few drops and slivers that escaped him in his outburst, only to hiss in pain as his bones creaked below his skin. It just hurt to hear it. As for where he was, he noticed it as a hospital or nurse's office, more specifically recovery girl's office. He'd been here enough times to know it off by heart by now. However, what surprised him was the lack of other patients. Usually there was at least one other person, even if they were just a student collecting supplies or recovering from a light headache, that they would get rid of after 5 minutes, but today there was nothing. But there was still supplies and medicine out, so it was. In his haze and immediate feeling of regained awareness, he had forgotten about how he ended up in this state. The UA games, that was what was happening. Laughing, and then wincing at his silliness, and then his pain, he began to remember what happened to him, and once again his memory hit him like a train or more specifically, like a one-for-all imbued fist straight to the face. And now was the time that he noticed his body was bound in thick layers of surgical cloth, another reminder of his ordeal. He had gone through another round of fighting with Todoroki, and thus had fucked up his body a whole lot more than he had in the first round, and even that was already extreme enough, as it is. Broken fingers with rings of reddened skin, exposed knuckles that bled rivers of red, splintering flesh of his arms, and legs that just held up with his attacks, as to not force his bones straight out through the skin, and to top it all off, a broken skull that he had used as some sort of last-minute attack strategy that Izuku swore was due to him watching too many quirk-related animes. And cartoons. Bearing through with the pain, the green-haired boy reached up towards the back of his head to feel around from where he assumed a break would be, but what he felt was the curves and newly integrated grooves all over the bone. That one attack had completely splintered his skull. So how was he just not dead? It was something to do with your quirk. Izuku couldn't help but let out a small yelp when an elderly voice burst through the ringing in his ears. Looking over to his right, he could only weakly smile at the sight of recovery girl, the woman holding an eerily strange mixture of anger and intrigue on her face. After a few seconds, Izuku managed to process her words. Like quirk? What about it? On the outside, he was shaky and nervous, just like he had all those times before. Inside, however, he was panicking. How much did she know? Does she know about One for All? Does she know about? Before you ask, yes, I know about One for All. Does she have a mind-reading quirk? I'm actually a close friend of All Might's, so stop worrying about Midoriya. she answered curtly and strictly, causing Izuku to effectively seize up all movement of his body as she began to walk over. Now, about this new development in your quirk. I assume that you have no idea what is happening to your body. He nodded. Of course, you don't. She sighed. Well, considering your interest in All Might, I also assume that you know that he doesn't have this sort of ability. What do you mean by interest? I don't actually know if you think that you are being subtle, but kid, your costume looks like a really bad rip off the man. It's not that hard to see. She now held an amused smirk on her face as Izuku began to deflate. Oh. Anyhow, you understand that All Might lacks this ability, right? Yes, wait, what do you mean by? If you let me continue without asking questions every sentence, then I might be able to tell you. Once again, he deflated. Now then, in your fight you seemed to go into an unnaturally driven state of thought that ignored all sorts of pain to push through to defeat Shadow, am I correct? The recovery girl was now sitting on a seat next to Izuku's bed. Well, not exactly. This captured her attention. As I was fighting, I could still feel the pain. Every time I moved it hurt, but all it did was motivate and push me forward to fight, like it was a really sick power-up or something at the end. He began to mumble and mutter under his breath, his speech deteriorating into an unintelligible collection of words to recovery girl. But to her credit, she wasn't really paying attention anymore. Instead, his attention was focused on the first part of the sentence. Ah, now that explains stuff a lot more then. Smirking when Izuku broke out of his mumbles to turn towards her, she picked up several papers from the desk and pushed them towards the boy. Taking this as a sign to pick them up, he did. On the paper was a picture of a skeleton, more specifically his own, and what he saw was honestly terrifying. There were two pictures, one of his muscles and one of his skeleton, and both featured shocking images of his broken and battered body after the use of One for All. They just looked like fragments, not even fully made up structures anymore, but surprisingly, they looked less beat up than he had imagined. Just what had been going on. You know about how All Might can change between his two forms, correct? Well, that isn't something that all One for All users can do, it is just a side effect of the quirk due to his unique genes. And after some scans and the information that you just revealed to me, I can confidently say that this looks to be your side effect of taking on One for All. And what exactly is my side effect? Well, I suppose that you thought that your body looked better than you thought, huh? So did I, but after some further analysis using some friends with specific quirks at the event, we noticed that when you went into this state, one we all nicknamed adrenaline, your body became more fluid and in tune with itself. This was all due to One for All. My friends don't know about the quirk, if you're worried. Anyway, from the scans I was sent, I could see faint threads of energy linking your bones together, as well as large build-ups around your ligaments. This was the side effect, Izuku. Confusion seemed to plague Izuku's face, inviting recovery girl to continue. When your body becomes victim of enough pain and stress, it goes into a state of fight or flight, it ultimately decides to go into fight. With this decision, One for All acts like a catalyst and supports your cells and nerves, muscles and bones by linking them together under a collection of connections or build-ups in case of your ligaments. By doing this, it allows more damage to be dealt to your bones before they completely break like before, forcing them together to become a stronger piece for the time that the ability is active, but it also allows your ligaments to have less strain due to the protection and support of One for All. Alongside this, the connections also mean that your cells can react better, and so they have stronger healing capabilities, meaning that you can go on for longer periods of time. In addition, any extra pain inflicted onto you, whether that be from your own body or an outside source, boosts these benefits and even increases your overall power output for a short amount of time. However, there is also a letdown period to this ability. She sighed after the long-winded explanation before taking out another scan, one just after his collapse on the field by an X-ray. Immediately after the usage of adrenaline ends, your body shuts down for a while. The connections disappear and so do the benefits, leaving your body empty for a short time, about 30 seconds in this case, but that may increase with usage. Due to this, the healing stops and doesn't begin again for a while, which results in some complications. At this, she pointed to head. Such as your skull. It was halfway through healing after your ridiculous stunt at the end of the fight when usage stopped abruptly. This left many marks and indents unhealed to the point where even I couldn't help, which now permanently has these grooves in it. Alongside this, your accelerated healing is not untouchable, it can and will shut down prematurely if you take too much damage. It can be beaten out of you. I'm sorry, Izuku. She finished her speech with a sympathetic look as he once again reached up to touch his damaged skull. So, that was the rundown of his new ability, huh? Adrenaline A power which lets him continue to fight through his pain and use it as a power multiplier. Interesting. Dangerous. However, if he wanted to really be hero, he would have to use his quirk to his maximum potential, despite his numerous drawbacks. Clenching his fist into his hair, he decided. Thank you for the concern and the information, but if I really want to be a hero like All Might, I'll need to be able to take everything that is thrown at me. Looking at the recovery girl right in the eye, his eyes narrowed with determination. And I made a promise to do just that. At first, the nurse just looked at him with such confusion and disbelief in her face that it almost looked like she didn't believe in him at all. But it was because he was taking this so well, no regret, no sorrow, just conviction to do his job even better next time. This wasn't the mindset of a teenage boy. This was the mindset of a hero. It's good to hear, Izuku. But you can't forget that you used your arms and legs a lot in that fight, so they weren't untouched, you know. Carefully, she leant over and began to unwind the wrappings on his arms. What Izuku saw made him flinch, but he had witnessed worse in his short time as a hero in training. On both of his arms were numerous cuts and bruises, scars that stabbed at and scarred his skin to the point where both of his hands appeared mildly deformed and misshapen. They would never be the same, and somehow, he could accept that. This is different. That got a chuckle out of her. Now, not that I don't like this new attitude of yours, Izuku, but you need to remember that this ability doesn't make you invincible, then you will be hurt even more. Maybe even die. A heavy silence suddenly filled the air. Then I'll get stronger. Lifting his head, his eyes locked straight with the ceiling as a steadily growing smile crossed his features. I don't know how, but I'll do it. Maybe with some suit modifications or some sort of outside medical help. He quickly looked at her, but I will do it. Don't you worry. Once again, that same sense of conviction filled his tone, and somehow it soothed the worry in her chest. Patting his arm slowly, she quietly spoke to the boy. You'll make a great hero someday, Izuku. Getting off the chair, she began to walk towards the exit until Izuku remembered something. Hey, how was Todoroki? Oh, him? He was fine. However, you cost him his place in the finals, that's for sure. They had that red-haired idiot Kirishima replace him. There was a moment where Izuku said nothing, but he just sighed at his friend's well-being, and then. Wait, did you say that I cost him his place in the final? She nodded. How long have I been out for? 2 days. 2 days. Oh shit. I left a laptop on the table in case you want to see what you missed. And about releasing you, I'd say we can release you later today, barring any strenuous movement. Thank you. After she had left, Izuku cautiously reached over to grab the laptop. Clicking on a few things, he quickly navigated to the main homepage, where a list of numerous trending topics and most searched results came up. He changed the settings to most recent. At the top of the search bar was a title that read Winners of the UA Games. Clicking on it, he was taken to a page where the top 3 were revealed. As it turns out, Kirishima had taken the place of Todoroki, with the final matchups being with Bakugo going up against Iida, who apparently forfeited and then left the stadium entirely, and Kirishima versus Tokoyami, with the Shadow Quirk user winning the duel. In the description of the finale, which was Bakugo versus Tokoyami, it was stated that the Explosion Quirk user was distraught and angered at the fact that he wouldn't be fighting against the quoted most powerful student in their whole fucking grade and, as such, began to copiously shout and scream and curse fucking Deku with his stupid fucking quirk. This was shortly followed by a picture of the podium with Tokoyami and Kirishima offering the camera a neutral or overly toothy grin, whereas Bakugo looked to be restrained and tied up on the number 1 spot with a medal stuffed into his mouth. Izuku just sighed, he would be in for hell when he entered school tomorrow. The next option down was the tragic news that the hero Agenium had retired after an attack from the hero killer. Almost immediately, Izuku began to worry for Iida, the boy having told both him and Uraraka about his brother a while back. This must have been why he left the stadium. He mused quietly, feeling quite somber as he quickly looked for his phone, only to find nothing. Sighing, he decided to move on. A few trends went by with little progress, such as certain hero companies that are interested in the 3 winners of the UA games and still very much intrigued by new powers of a certain half-cold, half-hot hero, which made Izuku happy that he hadn't screwed up Todoroki's chances too much. What surprised him though was the fact that he even saw his own name in one of the articles, citing his drive to win, an excellent combat focus with keen strategy to be a winning factor as to why some companies might want to pick him up. That shocked him. Not as much as what was to come next, however. When the boy reached the 5th most trending topic, he felt his eyes bulge out of his skull and his body seized up. He was the 5th most searched topic for him. It simply read, Izuku Midoriya. That was his name. After getting over the shock, although that took a while, he hesitantly clicked on it. What followed was extreme feelings of pride as he read some of the articles which talked about how he was the highlight of the games to some people and how his powers would make him an excellent hero to disappointment when he read about how some critics panned his reckless behavior and aggressive tactics made him unreliable. And then came what made him literally jump. Izuku Midoriya rated number 1 hottest guy of the UA games. What? Plagued by his own intrigue, he clicked on it, only to find a broad and bold picture of his shirtless form during his fight with Todoroki to appear on screen with a brief description of his likable traits and qualities. Turns out, person who had written this attended UA and had heard of Izuku before, per her notes, of which cited that he was nice and handsome with that sort of awkward personality that would make a girl coo and scream in awe while his personality was still tough enough that he could protect you and make you feel safe. Also, his muscles were such a nice set that it put some modern bodybuilders to shame with their attractiveness. It was fair to say that Izuku was so red and so deep into his covers due to the compliments that he was sure that he was going to pass out again. After that, it was just a link into the rabbit hole of Izuku's newfound fame. The article after that was talking about Izuku and how he could be of use to certain bigger hero companies, as well as talking about his similarities to famous heroes like All Might. A compliment like that made his heart soar with pride. He was compared to the All Might. Then, he was plunged back into a sea of embarrassment when the next article once again talked about his attractiveness and strife, compared not only to other members in his class, but also other famous heroes. The thing that got Izuku dizzy and floored, however, was an interview with several heroes after the event, where both Mount Lady and Ectoplasm commented on his fight as being a highlight, with himself being singled out. He even got called cute by Mount Lady. Leaning back, Izuku could only huff in disbelief at his new position. Looked like he had the following. Sitting around a table at the school, the girls of Class 1 sat talking more specifically about the UA games that had taken place 2 days earlier. So, did you guys get anyone coming up to talk to you about the games? Mina asked with a wide grin and confident exterior that told the rest of the group what had happened to her. Yes, I did. Unfortunately, most of it was just to comment on my looks in a cheerleading outfit or to ask me out rather than my skills, unfortunately. Momo relented to the group, sighing in disappointment as she crossed her arms and leant back in her chair. At least some people talked to you. I didn't get talked to once. The whole group momentarily jumped at the sound of the energetic and high-pitched voice before they centered their attention on a seemingly empty chair. Toru, maybe it was because they couldn't. They didn't see you. Sayu Asui, with her intellectual and straightforward comments, as always. Was the response. Anyway, I got talked to like twice, I think. Still cool though, huh? Jiru stated, her jacks once again tied around her fingers idly as she spoke. For a while, they all waited for the other member of their group to comment, only to get silence. Turning their heads to the side, they all centered in on one quiet and turned-in members of their audience. You're Raka. Did anyone talk to you? Finally taking note of her friends, the southern girl shot her head up quickly to see the rest of them staring at her, causing a faint red blush to dawn her already rosy cheeks. Huh? Oh yay, I got talked to, she quietly murmured before returning her eyes to her lap. The rest of the girls knew what she was thinking about. Are you still worrying about Izuku? As a stark contrast to her actions a few moments ago, Uraraka's head shot up almost immediately with an even redder face than before. What are you talking about? The rest could only chuckle at the shameless display of affection. You don't have to be like that, we all get worried about our friends. Mina answered with a smug grin adorning her pink skin. Uraraka responded to the taunt with silence. Speaking of Izuku, who would have thought that he had it in him? Toru spoke up, the usual enthusiasm gone from her voice in place of admiration and concern for her classmate. What, have it in him to go through so much pain and anger to win the fight? Momo asked, looking towards the invisible girl's general direction. Or the fact that he got that set of muscles. Now everyone had red faces because of a topic that no one had really talked about, being bought up by the ever-enthusiastic Tsu. Well, there is that aspect of it, but mostly that change that he had when he went down. With a small giggle, the pink-skinned girl of the group elaborated for the rest of them. Yay, like before he did all this stuff with his fingers to attack, but that whole thing was something else entirely. Jiru stated, but now she was looking down at her phone, typing something away on the keyboard. More like someone else. Uraraka's quiet voice hit the rest of the group like a ton of bricks. In her voice, there were so many different tones showing through. Yay. Are you alright? Cautiously, Mina started to speak up, but before she could answer, Jiru's voice shot through. Holy shit. Quickly shoving her phone into the middle of the table, everyone felt their eyes bulge as they looked upon the information presented to them. Before them, sat the name of their classmate at number 5 on the trending list. Wow, that's a thing. A seemingly invisible gust of wind turned the phone around at a 90-degree angle, showing the information to Toru a bit better. I wonder what it says. Reaching a hand over cautiously, Mina quickly touched the screen and after a few seconds of tension, it appeared to what? Izuku Midoriya rated #1 hottest guy of the UA games. Alongside that, a picture of Todoroki and Izuku's fight appeared, more specifically an image of when Izuku ripped off his shirt. Oh. Well, at least we have something to compare to, instead of going to our memories. Following up her action, Mina started to giggle nervously as a thin veil of lilac dusted her flesh. This was shortly followed by the creasing and moving of clothes awkwardly to give Toru's answer. Everyone had relatively the same reaction, but Uraraka. She just sort of froze while staring at the picture, everything but the blood flowed to her cheeks, that is. This trance was only broken when the bell signaling the start of form chimed, causing all the girls to look at each other before quickly moving to their seats just as awkwardly as other people began to walk in. The day was gonna be weird. In the dark room, Dabi was trying to focus on reading up on some of the latest villain-based events. After glancing through them, it always came back to one group, the League of Villains. Smirking, he leant back in his seat as he thought of how superior Stain was in every aspect, his dedication, his reasoning, his execution, his tap, tap, tap. Shaking his head, Dabi continued with his train of thought. Flipping back a few pages in his notes, he noted that the League tried to attack UA a few weeks back with some sort of pre-made creature with a multitude of different quirks that could supposedly go up against All Might himself, and somehow, they failed. They failed with a creature that could potentially beat All Might. These guys were pathetic, useless, so bad as villains that tap, tap, tap. Gritting his teeth, the villain slowly turned his head to see the tiny form of Toga curled up on a comfy chair in the corner of the room, only her face being illuminated by her phone. And somehow, that sickly lovesick expression was still proudly displayed on her face that still somehow made Dabi do a double take after all this time with her. Toga, do you mind? I'm trying to do some. Tap, tap, tap. Rolling his tongue around his mouth, he looked at the wall for a few moments before abruptly standing up and walking over to the blonde with an annoyed look dotting his scratched up face. When he finally reached her, he stood behind her bag as he tried to see what was on her phone. It was that boy from UA, the green-haired kid who fucked himself up. Toga. Finally, he caught her attention, getting the girl to turn around to look up at his face, obscured as it was by the darkened room. After meeting his eye, her face formed into one of unnatural annoyance, one that looked very out of place on her face. What do you want? Even her voice sounded annoyed, the one that Dabi had never seen deviate from lovesick and childlike was now filled with malice. So essentially, she was pretty invested in what she was doing. I just wanted to tell you that I'm trying to do some work, so can you keep you? He paused, glancing over at her to see that she was currently stuck on a picture of the boy in a shirtless state, with numerous cuts and marks staining his body. Creeping to a minimum while I do so. As quick as the words flew out of his mouth, she turned back to her own work, quietly shooting the fire quirk user away with a small yay, yay. To this, he happily did just that. As she looked forwards, Toga began to lose herself in the boy's eyes once more. At first, she was just intrigued by his scars, by his cuts, by his battle damage that had been dealt by his own quirk. That was the start. Then she started to look up more about him. First it was his name, then his age, then it was what people thought his quirk was, then it was videos of his fight, and before she knew it, she was looking at his pictures and was no longer interested in his cuts, but his eyes. In all the pictures, the videos, she saw that the green orbs had something lacking in them, had something missing that would make a person whole. Like her. Quietly, she began to stroke the side of her phone, biting her lip as she did so. Izuku was cute as well, even without the cuts, but the fact that his quirk seemingly relied on pain only increased his attraction in her eyes. Plus, who doesn't love a forbidden romance? Smiling brightly, she felt her body shudder as her biting managed to draw out a few drops of crimson onto her tongue. Toga was determined to make Izuku bleed for her. Watching as the world passed him, Izuku suddenly felt insignificant. Despite his feats in the last 3 days, staring out this window at all the cars shooting by, at all the people nonchalantly walking by, at all the birds and the trees, and just life in general, just continuing living and moving without any care about his own well-being. The world was still turning without him, and he was okay with that. In all honesty, he had always sort of realized that he was pretty much nothing in the world, especially having grown up without a quirk, which only further put him down into a pit of seeming worthlessness, but he found that the newfound fame that he had acquired from the games had just put all this into retrospect for him. But then again, that was why he needed to be a great hero. To make sure that he meant something to the world, to make sure that he could save people and places in the world, to make sure that he could use his newfound quirk to be a symbol of something great that could be looked upon and inspire others for years to come. Glancing down at his hands, gazing upon the bumps and cuts that adorned his flesh, he suddenly remembered that that was all of what One for All was about, legacy. Izuku was already a part of something larger than himself, and to live up to that responsibility, he would have to use all the power he was given, no matter what the world threw at him. No matter the cost. Shaking his head, Izuku pushed his body away from the window ledge, letting momentum carry his body further back into the hospital ward and towards a small collection of clothes that lay on his bed. Currently, he was dressed in a state of dress that could be considered complete to some, but to Izuku it just felt off on his person. The UA standard blazer had been abandoned on the bed, and his normally tucked-in shirt was left free to the world, while his red tie was left hanging around his neck lazily, with only his trademark red trainers and standard issue pants being part of the norm for the boy. However, he was told by recovery girl a few minutes ago to keep his outfit like this due to the nature of numerous bandages that had been reapplied before putting the clothing on, and that any other extra layers would simply make him uncomfortable. Sighing, he spun around to pick up his blazer and bag, ready to get back to his class after 2 days of absence when he was suddenly sent backwards by an unknown force. Stumbling back a few feet, Izuku let his body reassert itself and let the blurriness of his vision vanish before looking at what knocked him over, only to come face to face with a literal wall of muscle. "Young Midoriya. I have come to see you." Involuntary flinching at the harsh-sounding tone and volume of All Might's voice as it let loose, bounding around the free space inside the relatively empty hospital ward, Izuku tried to right himself quickly before the man. "Good morning, All Might. How was your da?" Before he could finish his sentence, he was interrupted by the sound of blood hitting the floor, accompanied by a large plume of smoke that rose before him. Sighing slightly, Izuku readied himself for the lanky skeletal form of All Might to emerge. Donned in a baggy shirt and tie, Toshinori Yagi lazily stood before him as blood sank between his lips. "Hey kid, how have you been?" The older man offered with a smile, rubbing away the crimson that began to drip down his chin. Smiling, Izuku stood back up and rubbed the back of his head, unintentionally running his fingers over the newly made grooves and just in his skull. "Me? Oh, I've been fine." Chuckling slightly, Yagi placed a hand on the green-haired boy's shoulder with a smirk. "Oh, just fine, hey. I think that becoming an internet trend would have made you a little better than fine, hey Midoriya." With unmatched speeds, Izuku's eyes shot open, and with a face dusted over by scarlet, he began to mutter and stumble over his words incoherently as his arms shook and started to blur before Yagi's eyes. "No, that's not the case at all. Instead, Chuckling at the young boy's actions, Yagi just stood back and motioned Izuku to sit onto the bed, which he did. "I was just joking, kid, don't worry. No, I'm here to talk to you about your side effects." The green-haired boy shot up and he seemed to lock eyes with the seemingly sunken eyes of All Might, the blue masses glowing with intent and worry. "What about it?" "Well, I just wanted to know how you feel about it." Shrugging, Yagi just gestured towards the wall where several pictures of Izuku's body were located, all of them broken and battered. Somehow, just looking at his form, the new successor could tell that somehow the man felt responsible for this. "It's difficult, well, sort of difficult. Difficult to grasp the situation, I guess." Shuffling around on the bed, he molded his fingers into the grooves into his hands to calm his nerves. "It's just that I've always been picked on for being quirkless, and I guess I just learned to accept pain, learned to deal with being knocked down. So, to have this new power forced onto me that relies completely on my willingness to accept my pain is just as it just." Once again, he found himself over his words, but now it was due to the unnatural way that Yagi just stood still and barely moved a muscle as he told him his story. "Listen Midoriya, I know all about the ins and outs of your new adrenaline power, and so, I just wanted to say that you should focus on honing one for all instead of adrenaline for the time being." Silence. What? It wasn't a horrible task, a thing that would go completely against logic. If he wanted to grow stronger, then he should probably train with the quirk that he held already, instead of investing himself into a whole new power that he just received. But even Izuku knew that he could hone both skills at once, using them in tandem with each other, so would All Might be asking him to only use one? All I'm saying is that one for all is a difficult power to harness, especially if you want to be able to use it without it breaking your body. And then there were the little things that Izuku could tell, how Yagi was being very nonchalant about the situation when previously he was very thorough in his concern, or how he was trying to avoid Izuku's stare always. "All Might. Wouldn't it make sense for me to try and practice both at the same time?" Yagi froze. "I suppose you could do that." Scratching his own head, the skeletal man chuckled nervously before sighing. "Alright, listen to Midoriya. Out of all of the previous one for all users, your side effect is the most dangerous. I didn't mention the whole idea of side effects before because I had no clue as to what yours would be, and I didn't want you to obsess over the different possibilities like you have done with other endeavors." He smiled. "However, like I said, yours is the most dangerous of them all." so if you are going to train for it, please be cautious and make sure to. I know. Surprising both figures, Izuku spoke up with clenched fists. I understand your concern, and I wholeheartedly thank you for every opportunity that you have given me. But now I have something to call my own. My own quirk that is completely my own, and to make sure that I don't rely on you constantly, I need to train with it. I need to hone any skill that I have, no matter the cost, no matter the difficulties. When I was younger, I would have given the world a quirk like this, so I must train hard to give everything given to me back. Looking up, he locked eyes with Yagi once more. And that starts with you and your quirk. Izuku. Ring ring. Looking up, both figures noted that the bell signaling the beginning of class had begun. Yagi was about to respond again, but he was interrupted by another voice. Alright Nori, I need to give Izuku one last look over before he goes on his way, so if you mind quietly stepping into the room. Recovery girl made her presence very clear. Giving one last look towards Izuku, All Might just muttered. Yay, sure. Remember, young Midoriya, that you shouldn't always have to be the one in pain to relieve others of it. Patting him on the shoulder, he promptly left, leaving Izuku with some thinking to do. After a short while, Recovery Girl gave Izuku a sympathetic look before going through with his checkup. And now, Izuku's feet felt weighted and heavy as he strode through the barren halls of UA. His heavy footsteps seemed to bounce right off the walls and strike his form with an unparalleled amount of force, forcing him to constantly be shaking his head to will the sense of unease and worry that had begun to shroud his mind. He also had some bandages wrapped tightly around his head, arms, and chest that Recovery Girl had reapplied to the point where they were just constricting enough that he could resort to thinking about the pieces of cloth instead of the crushing realization that had come about in the last few hours. Idly wrapping and unwrapping the bandages around his deformed and messed up visages of flesh, the green-haired boy allowed his mind to go back to a few moments ago, to the point where he began to feel this intense amount of burden and pressure. Thinking back on what he just witnessed at the medical bay, Izuku just walked up to a nearby wall, the shine present in the pristine white material, before the boy let his head collide with the construct as an attempt to clear his mind. It didn't. Instead, a sharp jolt of pain fluttered through Izuku's body, causing his eyes to burst open and his misshapen fists to fold in on themselves into some sort of fighting stance. Somehow, he could also feel the heat of his skin, how it skyrocketed for a short moment against the cool and cold material of the wall before it all went back down. It was like coming down from a high, it was just exhausting. During the checkup, Recovery Girl learned that his body had become more responsive to pain with a new side effect of one for all, pushing the idea of fight whenever any sort of pain shook his body. The semblance of pain wouldn't activate one for all though, and for adrenaline to activate he needed to reach a certain threshold of pain, of which he hadn't discovered yet, but his body would prepare itself for the quirk's use just like now. His body would attempt to get into a fighting stance subconsciously, and his skin would begin to heat up, like when the quirk was used. It was a strange development, just like this whole scenario, but the very idea that his body was wanting him to fight was something that concerned him the most. It wasn't like he liked the feeling of pain, but if he was going to be a truly great hero, he would just have to get used to it. Or learn to like the feeling. Biting his tongue, Izuku backed away from the wall, smirking slightly at the collection of condensation left on the wall from his sudden leap in body heat before turning on his heels and calmly moving down the corridor to his homeroom. Finally, he made it to the door. Taking a deep breath, he tried to open the door as quietly as he could so as to not draw attention to himself. Fate was a cruel bitch, however. Instead of opening it quietly, it not only made the loudest squeaking noise that Izuku had ever heard, but the sheer size of the thing gave him away almost immediately. Cringing at the noise and how every single tone of voice that he could faintly hear outside of the room went cold and silent, Izuku just awkwardly wandered into the room with both his eyes closed. He got into the room and slowly opened his eyes to see what the class was like. Before him stood a dazed and confused class, all of which held expressions of surprise at his sudden appearance, and two teachers, Aizawa and Midnight, who looked at him with amusement. Glancing back towards his classmates, he offered a small wave in the doorframe. Deku. Surprising the team the most out of anyone in the room, Izuku barely had time to react as Uraraka leapt at him from her chair, colliding hard with his chest to the point where he almost fell over backwards as he used the doorframe to help stabilize himself. After recovering, he felt his whole body light up, not only from the slight jolt of pain that he felt when the southern girl hit his already injured chest, but also at the fact that Uraraka was hugging him. He just froze, unable to even complete the hug, and he just held his arm slightly behind her back in fear of doing something wrong as she just held onto him tighter. Out of the corner of his eye, he could see some of his classmates giggling at the show, while some, most prominently Mineta, stood open-mouthed at the display. Hell, even Midnight was laughing at his expense. After a while, he sort of just muffled down a few words to the shorter girl. Hi. You're an idiot, you know that. Wincing at the amount of pain and anger in her voice, he tried to quickly come up with something to retort the statement, but instead it just came off as a quiet mess of jumbled mumbles that he was commonly known for. It got her to laugh though, so he didn't feel too bad. After a while, she let go, and when he finally got to look at her face, he could help but just think how beautiful she looked. Her cheeks, which were usually rosy anyway, held a rich tint of red, and her eyes were closed with a few hints of tears present in the corners, alongside a beaming smile that he couldn't help but follow suit with his own small smile. Ahem. A rough cough caught Izuku's attention, and both his and Yoraka's gaze fell onto Izawa, the man grinning one of his sickly smiles at the pair. At this, the southern girl took that as her cue to go back to her seat while trying to ignore the poking and prodding of her friends as she went. Meanwhile, Izuku wandered up to the man, wanting to know what the heck they were doing in class. It's nice to have you back Midoriya and to know that you're actually alive after that stunt you pulled. The eraser quirk user quickly stated, leaving the green-haired boy to only awkwardly chuckle at his stupidity. A damn headbutt. Well, we just started a few minutes ago, so I'll have Midnight explain what you're doing. Sinking back into his sleeping bag, Izuku then turned to the 18+ rated hero herself, with a woman offering a strange sadistic smile. Hello Izuku, you put up a good fight at the games, maybe a little too good for your own well-being, but a good fight nevertheless. Say, I heard that your quirk, or at least your new thing, relies on pain. She licked her lips at the boy, sending a strange shiver down his spine. If that's true, do you think that you can demonstrate it later? Behind him, Izuku heard the quiet murmurs of a jealous Mineta and Kaminari as he tried to quickly get himself out of this strange situation. I don't think that would be very good right now. He opted to look down at the floor. Don't worry, I'm only teasing. Well, the others have just been working on their hero names. At the sound of that, Izuku's head shot back up with a certain childlike look of wonder in his eyes. We'll be revealing them to the class in about 10 minutes, so go ahead and think of them. She offered him a whiteboard and a pen before telling him to go sit down. Twisting on his heels, the teen tried to avoid all forms of eyesight from everyone in the class. However, he got his eyes caught on one person, Bakugo. The angry teen was glaring at him with such intensity and anger that Izuku felt like he had killed the boy's family, but he knew that it was completely due to how he injured Todoroki in the games, or about how he was an internet trend. Oh yeah, his entire class, no, probably the entire school had seen that on the internet by now. Sighing, he quickly caught a glimpse of Todoroki after Bakugo huffed and turned away from him. After giving the boy a small nod, to which he got the same in return, he noted to himself to talk to the boy after the lesson. And so, the lesson went by for a few minutes, with thousands of possibilities swimming around Izuku's head. Since he was younger, he had thought of so many names that revolved around his idol, around All Might Jr., Super Might, All Man, he had thought of it all. But now that he had the man's power flowing through him, as well as the fact that this new power was completely his own, he felt as though taking his name was something wrong. So instead, he began to brainstorm new ideas revolving around pain, regeneration, about getting back up after being knocked down no matter what. After a while, people started to come up and present their names. The first up was Aoyama, the prestigious and fancy-looking boy, deciding to present his name like it was some sort of super serious presentation. All around him, Izuku heard criticism about the performance, but the teen decided to wait until his name was revealed to criticize. That was quickly thrown out the window when the name was revealed. I can't stop twinkling. Was that even legal? Like, could a hero name be the equivalent to a short sentence? Surprisingly, Midnight accepted it, leaving everyone dazed and confused at what actually constituted a name. Next up was Mina, who strode with her usual confidence and cockiness. Her hero name came down to being the heroine of Ridley Alien Queen. Subsequently, it was shot down, but Izuku couldn't help but feel bad for her when it was shot down. It actually sort of fit the idea that the pink-skinned girl had been going for this whole time pretty well. On her way back, the two had met eyes, and he had noticed that she had waved at him, with a light dust of lilac on her cheeks. Whatever the hell that was about, Izuku wouldn't know. Then came a stream of names after a rather good one from Tsuyu with Froppy the heroine, that kicks off the rainy season, which cemented the clean and friendly aesthetic that the frog quirk user was commonly associated with. This was followed by Kirishima's name Red Riot, which was actually based off of the old hero Crimson Riot, so it was actually a really cool naming idea, which actually had Izuku considering the All Might idea for a split second before going back to more logical and grounded names. After that came another long list of names, ranging from the really good such as Animar Chargebolt and Creati to more unique names like Earphone Jack and Shadow. After being told to change his from Baron of Explodo Kills, Bakugo sat back down, and Izuku soon realized that it was only him, and Iida left. In his head, he had gone through a whole list of interesting and cool names based around his quirk, but none of them affected him like he thought they would. He thought that he would feel empowered and strengthened by the name, while still being able to use it as thing of empowerment for other people, but all of them just sounded off to his ears. Then Ida chose his name of Tenya, and it was all down to Izuku. And it hit him. The name that meant so much to him, in both a negative and a positive way that practically had driven the path of his life since preschool. A name that could be paired with his themes and ideas around his quirk, a name that could empower Izuku in the darkest times, yet still sound powerful. A name that stood for just as much as the teen stood for himself. Standing up, Izuku proudly walked up to the front of the class with his name in hand. When he finally presented it, it got many different reactions from around the room: shock, confusion, laughter, all of them came towards him. Even Midnight didn't sound confident in his choice. "What, are you sure that you are okay with that, Midoriya?" Clenching his fist around the board, he spoke with no hesitation in his voice. "Yay. Up until now, I've never really liked the name. It stood for me being weak and powerless and being able to be pushed down easily. But recently, someone changed the meaning of the word for me and blew my world wide open. I was so happy to be finally recognized and have the word changed. It stands for getting back up even after being beaten down so many times." Glancing up, he quickly caught sight of two people in particular, Uraraka and Bakugo. The former had a look of pride and happiness on her face as she smiled at him, while the latter was angry and inflamed as he glared at him. But for the first time, Izuku didn't care. Looking back at his board, he smiled at what was written in bold writing. "Deku." Idly, Izuku began to trace the scars on his hands underneath their linen wrappings. Watching with an intense gaze as his fingers smoothed over the creases in the bandages, patting them to his skin until he felt the jagged patch of raised flesh, hardened and cool against his normally hot body. It was soothing somehow to know that his efforts would always be with him, that he could just look down and remember both his power, his strength, his strife, and his weakness, his downfall, his fragility with a few scratches. Somehow it filled him with a tiny amount of glee. Interlocking his fingers and pulling, he let the loud cracking sound shoot out into the environment before Izuku looked around the environment. Dragging his field of vision around the classroom, he noted that they were still on the English question that they were on a few minutes ago when he had first started playing with his hands, and that most of the class was still working on their question. It was some simple translation, nothing too difficult for Izuku, so he had just been daydreaming for a while, letting his mind escape and recap what had been happening to him recently. Present Mick was quiet for once, allowing him to think clearly, and the only sounds surrounding him were the little grumbles of Bakugo alongside the tapping of pencils against the desks, which helped the rhythm in his head a surprising amount. Gazing across the sea of seats once more, his eyes caught onto the sharp gaze of Tsuyu Asui, who was staring at him with a certain level of seriousness and concentration that the green-haired boy swore he could see lightning shooting towards his face. Tilting his head, he curled an eyebrow in her direction, hoping that she could see it and subtly tell him what was wrong. Instead, when she saw his confusion, she simply blinked once, smirked, wrote something down on a ball of paper, and threw it at him. Due to him being a row behind her, it wasn't that hard for him to catch. Unwrapping it, he leaned forward a bit to try and see what the frog quirk user had written, her scraggly writing hard to read. Eventually, however, he got it. Just trying to figure out where all the muscle goes. Like a pandemic of red across his whole form, Izuku recoiled at the comment with his chair following his movements, resulting in a sick screech. Glancing down, he noted how his body had gotten back into its messing with bandages mode where his arms were bent and subconsciously flexing, straining the material of his shirt slightly. With a quiet jumbled stutter, he looked up to see the triumphant and smirking face of Asui, her tongue out of her mouth in a sort of mocking fashion before returning to her work. Meanwhile, Izuku just found himself rooted to the spot by his own body's lack of movement as he tried to figure out what to do. In fact, now that he thought about it, a bunch of people had been acting weird around him today. It was only one period before lunch, meaning that they had had 3 periods before this, and during that time he noted himself being stared at by both males and females alike. First, in the homeroom, it was Mina and Uraraka who both turned away as soon as he clocked them. Then it was Maths, and during that, he noticed Ida examining his hands as he sat next to him while also asking him about his condition, which wasn't actually that out of the norm, but he also saw the stare of Kirishima, Kaminari, and Mineta as they talked in the corner of the room, with 2 of the group glaring at him for some unknown reason, while the other just looked perplexed and confused. Finally, there was modern literature with Cementus, in which he caught sight of Uraraka once again, this time alongside Jiru and Momo, the latter 2 not hiding their appearance when they noticed his presence. And now there was Asui. What was with everyone today? However, a quick refresh of his memory alongside the message on Asui's note told him everything in a matter of seconds, his fight with Todoroki and all the repercussions that had come about from it. Pulling his hand to his face, he roughly sighed into it, relishing at the movement of the soft linen on his skin as he began to reminisce about the sad event. How it had put him in this state. He could only think about how the train ride home was going to be, or even how lunch was going to be in a few minutes. Glancing back down to his books, he took note of the small notebook that he had acquired from Recovery Girl before he left. He picked it up. Inside, it held a vast number of ideas and tasks that he had appointed for himself. There was the long list of alternative hero names that he had thought of during homeroom, several medicine names provided to him that would help with pain if he felt any, and then a longer list of new discoveries about adrenaline. Humming to himself, Izuku smiled at his notes before quaking an eyebrow once more at what lay on the next page. New costume ideas. Ever since the discovery of his new side effect, he had been pondering about what changes to make to his costume. Yes, he still had one for all, and, as a result, still was part of All Might's quirk, so the change wasn't needed, but the idea of having something else of his own just spoke out to him and made him feel some small sense of glee at having come up with some ideas. Also, he was thinking of ways to deal with his bone-breaking problem, how to make sure it didn't affect his body too much, even during the small healing boost he got from using adrenaline. He had thought of a simple arm brace, one that would trail down from his more easily damageable ligaments, but he then relented, arguing that this could limit movement and that he could simply rip it off during his weird devil-may-care phase, seen in his fight with Todoroki. Then, there were grips attached to his elbows, but the same problems arose. Sighing once again, he leaned back into his chair, thinking of how to even customize his costume. After all, he didn't know anyone that could effectively alter it. Wait. Yes, he did. Leaning up, he began to think back to the games, to the round with the headbands, and how he, Uraraka, Tokoyami, and Inmei had gotten into the next round. Going back on his knowledge, he could recall that was in Class 1H and had a quirk that let her eyes zoom in and out to allow her to see better. However, what he was most focused on was the fact that she used machines and mechanical properties in her suit and gadgets to help her through the competition. If there was someone that could help him out with his costume, it was her. Going through his head, he recalled her telling him that she usually hung out with Power Loader at the workshop they had on school grounds and they had lunch next so he could visit her then. Nodding to himself, he spent the last 2 minutes just staring at the clock, all the while trying to ignore the feeling of eyes running up and down his body. Ring ring. Letting out an involuntary sigh, he watched as the rest of the class stood up and stretched from their translations before turning to their friends to begin casual conversation that was always around during lunch. President Mick gave a quick notice to place the papers on his desk if you were leaving, which everyone practically was. Following suit, Izuku stood up and made his way to the door, giving his teacher a quick goodbye as he did. Now in the hallway, he suddenly found himself very lost. Where was the workshop? Freezing in place directly outside the room, he started to focus on trying to figure out where it was, leading to his habit of mumbling under his breath to come back, causing the few students that were left to turn to him in confusion. Izuku? You alright? At the sound of his name, the boy's head shot up to meet the eyes of Mina, a sense of daze and amusement in her tone as she looked upon him. Also, judging by the floating mess of clothes standing next to her, he quickly deduced that Toru was with her. Me? Oh yeah, I'm good, just trying to figure out where the workshop is. Standing back up from his hunched position, he placed his hands on the back of his head, smoothing his hands over his cracked head again, causing him to grit his teeth when he did so. However, he did miss the subtle shift in the yellow iris of Mina as she glanced at his curled arm with a smirk. The workshop. Why do you need to go there, Izuku? Turning to his side, he quickly noted that now Toru was speaking, her softer voice feeling quite close to his ear. And, as it turns out, she had moved from her spot next to Mina and was now standing next to him, her skirt swishing alongside her blazer's sleeves. I need to upgrade my costume. My new thing doesn't really work with my old suit. He replied sheepishly, letting a thin veil of red dust his cheeks as he spoke, subconsciously turning away from the invisible girl. Oh yeah, we haven't asked you, have we? Mina spoke up, turning to Toru as she did. Ask what? Oh. Yeah, about that super cool awesome thing that he did at the games. What was it, Izuku? Why did you suddenly go all raw? I'm such a badass. Huh? Quickly forgetting her confusion, the invisible girl quickly shuffled back to the front of him and began to jump up and down before him, causing her clothing to begin to fly and jostle. Well, it would take some time for me to go through it all. Trying to ignore the slight jab at his not badassness, he chuckled slightly. Oh, well, I know where the workshop is, so I can take you there while you explain your new thing to us, alright. The pink-skinned girl next to the duo quickly spoke up once more, excitement about his new side effect leaking through her words. Thinking it through, Izuku quickly agreed to go through his new side effect, making up a cover that it was just some new aspect of a regular strength quirk so that he wouldn't reveal anything about one for all on accident. As they were walking, with the only boy in the trio making his over-the-top hand signs and arm waving as he went through the new abilities he had procured, he found out that the girls were actually really interested in the topic, more so than he actually had previously thought of. Over the last term, Izuku hadn't really spoken to them much, instead choosing to stick with Iida and Uraraka for much of it, as that was generally what was easiest for him, but on the few occasions that he found himself enjoying their company. Like right now. They were completely different from him, both were some of the most extroverted and out there people he had seen in his whole life, and that was pretty hard to do with the ever-evolving world of quirks and the like, while he was one of the shyest kids in the whole class with a quirk that he couldn't even use properly. Plus, the fact that he looked like he had been copied and pasted from a very plain background from an anime didn't help, while both Mina and Toru stood out from the crowd in their own way, whether that be with the bright color of their body or their lack of a body. They were just so different to him that he felt sort of entranced when they talked and spoke to him. They were giving him an insight into life that he definitely couldn't be a part of in his current state. So your power practically relies on you beating yourself up to get a power up? That's a harsh man, like real hardcore. Mina quietly quipped as they walked, whistling to herself at the end after Izuku had finished his explanation. One thing that he had noticed about Mina was her broken up use of language and slang, which was something that he really didn't experience a lot, but it was a nice break from his usual stutter whine nonsense. Yay, pretty much he laughed along with her as he thought about her words, how it was probably the tamest way that it could be described without being painful. Wow, you're really cool now, then, huh? Toru spoke up once again, reminding Izuku of her presence. I wouldn't say that. Oh, come on, man. You're super cool now. You got this awesome quirk that absolutely rocks, you've got this real sweet personality, and not to mention your muscles. You are so cool, Izuku, and don't you forget it. Leaping before him, Mina began to act like some sort of army drill sergeant about being cool, waving her hands in front of Izuku's face alongside the raising of her voice, made the boy go bright red. Well, that, and the fact that she mentioned his muscles again. Well, oh yay. You have all these muscles, don't ya? Where the hell have you been hiding all this time, huh, Izuku? Now it was Toru's turn to have a go at him, her swaying clothes stopping abruptly to poke her finger into his upper pectorals, prodding them, as if to test that they were actually real, with a tone of voice that sounded genuinely offended at the fact that he hadn't ripped off his shirt. And told the whole damn class about his muscles. And somehow, all of this just made Izuku melt into a tsunami of red blushes and stuttering as he tried to find a way out of the situation. However, fate seemed to smile on him as the two girls began to giggle at his incompetence. Ah well, here we are, muscles, the workshop. Pausing in her stride, Mina gestured to a large two-door room to their left where a lot of noise seemed to be accumulating from the inside. Funny how he didn't notice it earlier. Ignoring his previous embarrassment, he turned to the two. Well, thanks for showing me here, it means a lot. They both shrugged him off. Nah, it was no biggie, really. The pink-skinned girl retorted, crossing her arms under her bust. Yep. We're happy to help. The invisible girl added, her clothes swaying once more. Seriously though, thank. Oh yeah, you ain't too worried if we tell everyone about your quirk's new shtick, right? No. Okay, bye. Before he could even respond, he noted that the two had run off to the cafeteria, giggling the whole way there. Slumping over, Izuku sighed, as he knew that he was going to be getting a bunch of questions during the hero activity that they had last period. Cautiously, he wandered over to the doors. Judging from all the noise of machines and tools from inside, he knew that the girls had actually taken him to the workshop and not just some random place of the school to make fun of his incapability to socialize. Walking up, he was about to knock on the door when suddenly, all the previously erupting from the room stopped abruptly. Quirking an eyebrow, he was about to open the door to check what was up. What the? Boom. In about 5 seconds, Izuku realized that he had been thrown clean across the corridor by some unknown force, landing flat on his ass with a thud. His ears were ringing too, a loud piercing sound that he could help but winced from a newfound weight that covered his body. From his squinty eyes, he could also see that there was smoke wafting around the air alongside the swinging of doors. Eventually, his ears stopped ringing just in time to hear the crackly voice of Power Loader. This is why you have to be careful, god damn it. This is like the 5th time this week. Shaking his head, he tried to push himself up, but Izuku found his body trapped beneath something, or more accurately, someone. Glancing down, the green-haired teen felt his whole body freeze up for the umpteenth time today as he stared down a head of messy pink-haired, curved, and cutting into his chest with their softness. There was also a pair of goggles staring back at him, the dark lenses reflecting his eyes back at him like a distorted mirror world before continuing to gaze at his attacker. This person was female. He could clearly tell, and the fact that he could feel it didn't help. Decked out in a loose tank top and some sort of working pants and boots, the figure began to shift in his lap. Loader bot, this is just a happy accident, cause now I know not to. Pushing her own body up, Izuku soon found himself face to face with the piercing yellow eyes of Hatsume, the crisscrosses being a clear giveaway, as well as the smirk that adorned her face. Oh hey. It's you. Welcome Izuku. Smiling at the boy, she began to rise from his form, giving Izuku an unfortunate glance at his chest as she did so, causing him to recoil and begin muttering under his breath as he tried to calm himself down while May finished rising from her human seat. Suddenly, he found a hand thrust into his face. He stared at it, confused. What? You wanna stay on the floor or something? Even in her voice, the inventor's smirk was present in her tone as the boy looked up to see the same smirk adorning her pretty face. Quickly he took up the offer. As he stood, he saw the small form of Power Loader skulking off further into the back of the lab as he stood with May. Thanks. He muttered quietly, removing her hand from his as he stood. So, what brings you to this humble abode, hey hotshot? She asked, placing her hands on her hips as she stared at him with a smirk. Oh yeah, I'm here to talk to you about a possible costume upgrade. In an instant, he saw as her eyes lit up with wonder and curiosity. Oh. An upgrade. Yeah, I can help you with that. Come in. In a matter of a few seconds, Izuku found himself ushered into the workshop via a slight push to his back by the girl before she ran ahead into the shop. Following her lead, he started to look around the place. All around him, Izuku saw different cut-up parts of machines and robots with wires and cables hanging out haphazardly from each one, alongside a few fully built models that were blinking lights of varying colors or rotating in circles on the desk. Paired with this was a lot of loud banging of metal and cutting of scrap that the boy would consider painful if he wasn't the owner of one for all. Eventually he made it to the center of the room with May. Alright bucko, what are you looking for? Pulling himself out of the daze he was in, he began to address her. Well, I recently just learned about you know what I did at the games, right? He quickly questioned, quivering an eyebrow at her. Oh. You mean when you went and messed that lovely body of yours up and then you got back up and screwed it up even more? If so, then yeah, I remember. He couldn't help but sigh. After a quick explanation of his abilities, he saw that she went into a comatose state of thought for a few seconds. So what are you actually looking for? It should have been a simple question. It wasn't. Honestly, I have no clue. I just want something to complement my powers, honestly maybe something to reinforce my body, I guess. He just shrugged his shoulders at her as she continued her thoughts. You thought about braces? Arm braces? Yeah, but they'd restrict my movement too much, and even if they weren't, I'd probably just rip them off if I get too serious. Yeah, you're right, you did get real aggressive in that fight. How about full body armor? I got a sample if you want a test run. Walking away, she quickly wheeled in some heavy-duty looking armor with heavy patches and panels that would efficiently cover his entire being in defense. Looks a bit too much for me, if I'm going to be honest. Scratching the back of his head, he began to look around the room for inspiration as May quietly listed off options in the background. All around him, he saw clamps and grips that could work, but nothing solid. However, soon his eyes landed on a suspended piece of gear that caught his attention. It was a golden frame by the looks of it for a similar battle suit to what May had just bought out. However, this one was just the wire frame. It was simple, with only one thin wire leading down what would be the arms down to a bendable section at each elbow, then to a palm-sized circle in the center of where the hand would be on each side, with 5 other wires leading off it where the fingers would be. It didn't have legs, however, only containing a metal line that would go down the spine. To be honest, it looked exactly like the wire frame of a drawn character, like a manga character or something, but there was just an aspect of it that caught Izuku's eye. Walking closer to it, he reached out to touch it before May caught him a little too late. Oh, you might want to be careful of that. It has. Ouch. After encountering the material, he found a section of his linen cut by something as a few drops of blood started to poke out through his skin. Alongside this, he felt the heated skin and rush of energy before they subsided. Holding his hand, he examined the material a bit closer with his eyes. Along the outside of the wire were hundreds of tiny grips and clamp-looking materials made of sharp metal. Yeah, I tried to warn you. This is a skeleton that we put inside the suits. The grips secure it to the inside of the suit and give it extra protection, so they usually aren't exposed like this and they are never facing the skin. Sorry about that. Then, that sparked an idea in Izuku. You said that these clamps and grips attach it to the suits, right? She nodded. How deep would they go if they were to go into human skin? May flinched. Oh, if we go with the longest model, to the bone. I think. To the bone, huh? That's it. Turning to May with a face full of inspiration and concern, he spoke of his idea. Theoretically, these grips could secure a broken bone while sacrificing the skin to make contact, correct? So, what if I had a similar schematic for my own costume, because if I'm going to be using my power, then it will just heal after coming out, and even the initial burst of pain would help boost me to that initial boost of power. Looking up from his hand, he saw the concern on her face. So are you saying that you'd be willing to have something like this on your body to achieve your boost? Are you sure you're okay with that? Looking back at the frame, he clenched his hands. If I'm going to overcome this power and be a truly great hero, then I have to do anything. I have to overcome this pain, and this will help me do it. Twisting his body, he stared right into her yellow eyes with such determination and conviction that it made May shudder. Can you help me do that, May? She paused for a few seconds then giggled. Alright then hotshot, let's get to making your scar suit. Scar suit? Heh, not a bad name. Thanks for watching my video, and make sure to check out the author of this fanfic, link is in the description. See you next time, till then sayonara.